Welcome to The Lost Book. This is a video telling lesson plan by me, Jamie Keddy. And in this accompanying podcast, I'm going to talk you through the activity and offer you some tips and guidance along the way. To find out more, go to lessonstream.com. Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley. Actually, you've got to say it with a posh, standard English accent, like Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley. That's my best attempt. I don't know much about fly fishing. I mean, I know that it's a kind of fishing that uses artificial flies to attract and catch fish, but I've never tried it myself. I don't really know anyone who does it. I'm not a fish, so it's not something I spend any time worrying about. But I know that in the United Kingdom, at least, there's quite a small but very enthusiastic community of fly fishers. It's one of those hobbies it's never been mainstream, but you've got a very passionate core of people that do it. So given that fly fishing is not exactly a mainstream hobby, it's interesting that almost everyone of my generation who lived in the United Kingdom in the 1980s remembers the book Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley. And that's where this activity starts. It starts with a question for your students. Why would a book about such a niche hobby, fly fishing, be so well known to a generation? After listening to your students' answers or theories or ideas, tell them that it's actually quite simple. Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley became famous or infamous because of a story. So what you're going to do next is quite simply to tell your students the story of Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley. The script, it's only about 200 words long, is included in the lesson plan. And you can choose to read from the script, or you can just familiarise yourself with the story before telling it to your students. It's completely up to you, but whatever you choose to do, just make sure you're familiar with the story or the story script so that when you tell it, you communicate and connect with your students. This is eyes up as much as possible. Also, don't rush it. Speak slowly, calmly. Give your students space. Space to hear, space to think, space to visualize, space to comprehend. So let me tell you this story. I'm going to try and do so without notes because I wrote the script, so it's quite fresh in my head. I'm familiar with it, so I think I can do it without notes. So I want you to picture the scene. We are in London, and there's this very smart elderly gentleman. He's got combed back grey hair. He's wearing a brown suit, and he's got a walking stick in hand. And this man is going from one second-hand bookshop to another. And in each shop he asks, with a hopeful smile, "Excuse me, do you have a copy of Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley?" But this poor man, he's not having much luck because nobody's seen it, nobody's heard of it, nobody's got it. You see, the problem is that this book has been out of print for years. And eventually, he decides to give up and go home, tired and disappointed, with his tail between his legs. And he's met by his daughter, his grown-up daughter, who's very kind and very caring. She's really concerned for her father. And she said, "Oh, no luck, Dad? Don't worry, There's still some more secondhand bookshops for you to try, but why don't you do it tomorrow? And also, why don't you just call them from home, instead of walking around the streets? You're getting on, you're quite old. She doesn't actually say that, but she implies it. So that's what the man chooses to do the next day. From the comfort of his favourite armchair, he picks up the phone and he starts to call. Hello, do you have a copy of Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley? And eventually, success. Oh, you do? Oh, that's wonderful. Could you keep it for me? Yes, my name. It's J.R. Hartley. So that was me telling the story, and I suggest that you listen to that maybe 2 or 3 times as part of the preparation, just to get familiar with it. And when you tell that story to your students the first time, because you're going to tell it to them again in a moment, I suggest that you pause just before that moment of success, when he's on his sofa making phone calls, so that your students don't know how it ends. That's something we can take advantage of. Now, I've got 5 questions in the lesson plan, and we're going to go over them one at a time. I always prefer a less is more approach, so that 5 good quality questions are always better than 20 weak ones. And the first 2 questions are concept checking questions. Especially for lower language levels, I would put them into pairs or small groups and ask them to share what they understood, or more importantly, what they didn't understand. Let them support each other. And the 2 concept checking questions are, where is the man? And what is he doing in the first part of the story? And number 2, what is the problem? Now, these are quite standard concept checking questions, but what I like about them is that they're designed to draw attention to, or to get back, key phrases in the story that students really have to be aware of, or at least understand, in order to get it. So let me just tell you what they are. The first one, where's the man? And what is he doing in the first part of the story? He is visiting second-hand bookshops. He is looking for a copy of the book. And what's the problem? Well, the book is out of print. And get these phrases, along with any other words or language or phrases that come up, get them all on the board. Second-hand bookshop, a copy of a book, out of print, they don't make it anymore, etc. So from there, we've got 3 key questions. The first one, of course, is how do you think the story ends? But your students don't. And it's interesting because in my experience, most people do guess that this elderly gentleman is himself the book author, J.R. Hartley, but not everyone. So will your students guess the ending? And number 2, when do you think the story is set? You want students to start thinking about this. What is this story all about? Will it occur to them that the story takes place in the days before the internet? Because these days, if you were looking for a second-hand book which is out of print, you would just go online. And this question is actually designed to connect with another question which is coming later. I'll mention that part. Question number 3, and this might be my favourite question, is where do you think the story comes from? And when I've tried this, it always takes a while for it to occur to students that the story might come from an advert. So don't give them the answer too quickly. You want them to think. This is a great thinking question. It's been said that stories are to humans what water is to fish. We are surrounded by them, but it's not always apparent. Stories come at us from all sorts of different places, but we're not always aware. So when you ask students that question, where does this story come from? It's a great opportunity to start exploring all the different sources of stories that find their way into our lives? It's a great thinking question, but don't let students answer it yet. Before you hear their ideas, what you're going to do is tell them the story a second time, this time in its entirety, including the ending. And there's a lot of really good reasons for doing so. One of the reasons is that now students know that it's an advert, they're going to experience it in a different way. There's this new level of meaning. And what they have to do is listen and consider what the product or service could be and how it fits into the narrative of the story. Also, later in the activity, students are going to become storytellers themselves. They're going to work with an advert, prepare to tell the story. So this is another good opportunity for them to see you, their storytelling teacher, model the task. And once you've told the story a second time, then it's time to encourage students to guess. What's the missing product? This is the time when that previous question about when is the story set connects to this one. That can provide a clue. If this is a story that takes place in the days before the internet, what could be the product? You could set up a student to teacher question slot. So students have to ask you, let's say, 10 questions, 10 closed questions. Those are questions to which you can only answer yes or no to work out the product. What is it? Will they get there? And finally, whether they work out the product or not, it's time for you to let them see the advert.
I don't suppose you have a copy of Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley. It is rather old.
I'm sorry.
It's by J.R. Hartley.
No luck, Dad. Never mind. There's still a few more to try.
Good old Yellow Pages. We don't just help with the nasty things in life, like a blocked drain. We're there for the nice things, too.
You do? Oh, that's wonderful. Can you keep it for me? My name, oh yes, it's J.R. Hartley.
I told you he was posh, didn't I? We said already that stories are to humans as water is to fish. We are immersed in stories, and so many of those stories come from advertisers trying to persuade us to buy their products. Storytelling is a key tool for advertisers and marketers. But given the importance of stories in our lives, it's worth asking, what is a story in any case? What is a story? And there's a really useful definition, a working definition. I've seen this many times. I think the first time I saw it, it came from a very famous improvisational theatre company in Chicago called Second City, which gives their improvisers, their actors, a working definition of a story, which is that a story is a character in pursuit of a goal in face of some obstacle or challenge. Now, if you're going to describe that to a child, you might say a story is when somebody wants something but can't get it because there's something stopping them. Sounds a bit strange perhaps, but this idea is one that we can apply to so many situations, so many stories across cultures throughout history. You can apply it to virtually any Hollywood film and also to many adverts. In the case of adverts, of course, the person or the character or the hero is the customer. The customer wants something. It might be more money. It might be freedom. It might be to look good or to be reunited with a book. And the J.R. Hartley advert is quite formulaic in this sense. It has this structure, a character in pursuit of a goal in the face of some challenge or obstacle. The character is the elderly gentleman, J.R. Hartley. His goal, to be reunited with a book he wrote as a younger man, but the obstacle is that the book is out of print and nobody's got it. But that's not all, of course, because in an advert, This story needs an agent of change, an agent that will facilitate the customer getting what they want. And the agent is, of course, the product or the service. In this case, it's a business directory called Yellow Pages that some of you will remember, some of you won't. It is basically like the internet, but in handy book format. Very useful in its day. From here, I suggest that you give out copies of the story, the script. It's included in the handout. This is going to give your lower level students an opportunity to see the text and clarify any uncertainties they may still have about the language. And then, this is the last question, ask students to get creative and think of a slogan for Yellow Pages that could appear on the screen at the end of the advert, because the Yellow Pages actually had a very clever slogan which connects perfectly with the J.R. Hartley advert but doesn't appear on the screen for some reason. The slogan is, "Let your fingers do the walking," and this is actually reflected in the logo, which is a pair of fingers walking across a landscape of pages, which is pretty clever, don't you think? And after all that, really it's time for the proper activity to start, because this is for your students to find another advert, one which uses a story. It could be a controversial TV advert, an advert they remember from their childhood, an advert they love, an advert they hate, a funny advert, a well-known advert from their culture. J.R. Hartley is a perfect example, an innovative or unusual advert, or another advert from the Yellow Pages series, because there were many others that your students could choose from. Then they prepare to do what you did, that is prepare the story, tell the story in class. They've seen you do it twice. Now it's time for them to do the same. Just one last thing. It might be tempting for you to encourage your students to do the same as you. That is, withhold the product when they tell the story of the advert. And this can work well. What it can do is it can create this question, this central question, make things more interactive, encourage students to listen and then guess the product. That's the good thing. However, and I've seen this many times, there's a potential problem that depending on the advert, it might be very difficult to tell the story without mentioning the product. And in that case, you'd be making things difficult for your students. I always prefer tasks that require students to tell stories the most natural way possible. So you might want to talk to your students about this, give them the option, but don't make it obligatory that they withhold the product, all right? So that was the advert. If it's the first time you've ever seen it, I wonder what you thought. Did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Perhaps you found it to be a bit overly sentimental. But whatever you think, it was incredibly popular. One of the most popular TV ads ever, at least in the United Kingdom. How many other adverts can you think of from back then that actually have their own Wikipedia pages? Just look for J.R. Hartley. And it found its way into British culture in some very unpredictable ways. I remember seeing it parodied in comedy shows more than once. And we used to joke about it at school. In fact, 1983, when the advert came out, I was 11 years old. And I shouldn't tell you my age. I shouldn't tell you my middle name either, but it's Richard. I am Jamie Richard Keddy. I remember when the other kids discovered that, they called me J.R. Keddy, ha ha, fly fishing by J.R. Keddy, ha ha. It is almost like a sort of pre-internet meme. And I've got a friend and colleague called Chris Rose, some of you might know him, and he worked in a bookshop in London in the 80s. This is what Chris has got to say.
So you remember that advert?
Yeah, because it was late 80s, I think, and I was working in a bookshop at the time, part-time job, and the number of people we used to get phoning up saying, "Hello, have you got this book, Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley?" It was so annoying.
So yeah, a very popular advert. In fact, I've just remembered that there was a publisher released a book called Fly Fishing by J.R. Hartley, a real book. This is an example of what you might call reverse product placement, and you can probably think of other examples of that, but not from the 80s. This was unheard of. Stuff like that just didn't happen. And that brings this podcast to an end, and I hope you enjoy the activity. Hope your students do too. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hello. Do you have a copy of Video Telling by J.R. Keddy? Oh, you do? Marvellous. Could I reserve a copy, please? Yes. The name? Yes, it's J.R.